Canada Bay Council recently released the final draft of their Pedestrian Access and Mobility Plan, and they are looking for feedback from residents. If you're interested in having a look at the PAMP, you can find it on their Collaborate website. I did wonder why Council suddenly developed a PAMP. I think the answer is that the state government has funding available for walking and cycling projects, but councils can only apply for that funding if they have a current PAMP in place listing the works that they need to be done. Funding has been available for the last 2 years, and Canada Bay hasn't received a cent so far. I guess if Council didn't have a PAMP in place, then you can't blame the state government for not handing over any money. Now that Council has a plan, it can apply for funding. PAMPs have been around since 2002, so this isn't a new idea. The 3 councils that merged to form the Inner West Council all had individual PAMPs in place in the past, but I don't know if Canada Bay has ever had one. This PAMP is a pretty hefty document coming in at 268 pages. If you went by the page count alone, you'd think that Council got good value for money. But the IWC also released their plan for comment this week, so it's interesting to compare the two. For starters, I will say that the consultants have done a good job on providing a very detailed list of works that are required to make Canada Bay more accessible to pedestrians, and most of the works have been costed. If you want to dig into the details, they've listed 347 separate bits of work that need to be undertaken. If this work gets funded, some concreting contractors are going to be kept very busy for a long time. There are many terrible sections of path, or non-existent path, that are going to be fixed. The council provided unit rates to the consultants, and the total bill comes to a bit over $5 million. Although there are some large projects such as bridges that aren't costed. The Inner West Council, by comparison, has over 10 times the number of issues to fix. They've discovered 4,350 compared to 347 for Canada Bay. Now that could be due to the way the issues were categorised, or lumped together. Or it's because the IWC consultants spent a lot more time looking for problems with crossing the road. Note that they found 2,256 crossing deficiencies, which is a problem with getting across a road, whereas the Canada Bay report lists 0. However, crossing deficiencies are things like missing curb ramps and refuge islands, and the Canada Bay report does list about 80 of these. Around 50% of the Inner West Council crossing deficiencies relate to poorly aligned pram ramps. Now, I'm not saying either report is wrong or bad. It could be that historically the Inner West Council has done a really bad job of installing pram ramps, and they now have a massive backlog of work to fix that problem. Alternatively, Canada Bay Council might have a much higher tolerance for badly aligned ramps and just doesn't see them as a problem. I do wonder about this sort of stuff, and I hope our councillors and council staff wonder about it as well. Why the big difference in outcomes in the reports? It's not about whether one report is better or worse than the other, it's about understanding the underlying factors that produced such enormous differences. Similarly, the Inner West Council thinks they can install a new pram ramp for $1,500, whilst Canada Bay thinks it costs $1,800. I wonder if our ramps are bigger or better than theirs. Again, what's the difference in costs for a small slab of concrete when concrete costs about $300 a cubic metre? A big disparity between the two reports is the quality of the maps. The Inner West Council report contains a whole series of maps that are quite clear. In particular, I like the maps that show all the pedestrian route segments. You can see that the Inner West Council has thought about creating a coherent network of pedestrian routes. The Canada Bay report, on the other hand, contains only a few maps, and most are completely unreadable. If they're supposed to show a network of routes, I can't see where they are on these maps. Now, rather than boring you with more comparisons, I want to step back and look at the bigger picture. The guide on how to write a PAMP was released by the defunct RTA back in March 2002. It's nearly 20 years old, and it appears no one has bothered to update it. When this guide was drafted, the driver was king of the road, and pedestrians were a pesky afterthought. Moving vehicle traffic quickly and expeditiously was the mantra of the RTA. After all, the R and T in RTA stood for roads and traffic. Notice how we got rid of that thinking some years ago by putting transport for New South Wales in charge. Transport implies using any mode to move around, not just cars. The City of Sydney made a similar change by renaming their traffic committee to instead being the Local Pedestrian, Cycling and Traffic Calming Committee. Notice the order in the name. Pedestrians are first priority, then cyclists, and then traffic calming. The only mention made of traffic is slowing it down and making it safer. There is a clear recognition that in local streets you can have speed or you can have safety, but you can't have both. They've gone for safety. Earlier this year, the then Secretary of Transport for New South Wales issued a policy which upended the old hierarchy and explicitly placed pedestrians at the top, followed by cyclists, and then general traffic and on-street parking for motor vehicles at the bottom of the food chain. Although this policy has been out for some months, some councils seem to have missed its release. The guide to writing a PAMP has also missed the safe system approach revolution in road safety. It really needs to be updated to include that approach along with this new hierarchy from Transport for New South Wales. For example, the Canada Bay report lists 2 Austroads guides that were referenced in the preparation of the report. However, it doesn't mention which version of the guides were used. Now this is critical because only the latest releases of the guides in question use the safe system approach. If old versions of these guides were used, and we discovered that happened with the WestConnex project at Rozelle, then the report is missing a key safety improvement. But what the guide to writing a PAMP is really missing is any mention of dealing with traffic. Let me explain using Timbrell Park as an example. Timbrell Park is a great bit of open space with a multitude of users. In recent years, Council has sought to upgrade the facilities in the park by developing a master plan for the park. And that's all good, but the consultation and the master plan ended up taking the same approach as the PAMP. Traffic is someone else's problem. One of the main concerns that residents raised during the Timbrell Park consultation sessions was getting across Henley Marine Drive without being hit by a speeding driver. What was the response in the master plan report? That's out of scope. That's a traffic problem. Similarly, the PAMP makes a comment about the consultation in the last paragraph here, where they say the comments are more traffic and road-related matters. For example, the notion of speeding cars, cars parking too close, and obscuring the view for pedestrians, etc. I'd argue that this is the elephant in the room that the report fails to see. Residents raised this again and again as a problem, but the PAMP passes the buck by saying this is a traffic problem and nothing to do with pedestrian access and mobility. Hello? How is getting across Henley Marine Drive, for example, not an access and mobility problem? If Council manages to find $5 million, then local concreting contractors are going to be kept busy for years fixing all the nagging issues listed in this report. However, that won't do much good unless Council looks at the bigger picture. Going back to Timbrell Park, how do residents in these areas safely get across Henley Marine Drive to access the facilities in the park? There's no point in building flash new pram ramps on the northwestern side of the road that simply make it easier for people to get from the footpath onto the road, where they are then run down by a speeding rat runner. I really can't see anything in the PAMP that ties back to the January 2021 Transport for New South Wales policy release that puts pedestrians first. This report really says to parents pushing prams that we'll give you ramps with better gradients to transition from the footpath to the road, but you'll still have to dodge speeding drivers once you get there. We'll get you onto the road, but we have no interest in allowing you to safely cross the road, because that's a traffic problem. The same goes for elderly residents with hip or knee problems or residents in wheelchairs. Here's a nice ramp, but if you're too scared to use it to cross the road, that's a traffic problem. There are also numerous mentions in the report about how parents are reluctant to allow their kids to walk to school. But there's nothing in the report about creating safe routes to any school. Your kids won't be at risk of tripping over a curb anymore, but getting them safely across the road is not our problem. That's a traffic problem. Because in the end, when it comes to this question of speed versus safety, Council is still fixated on speed. They pay lip service to safety, but when it comes to concrete actions that would improve safety, the reality is that Council still has a mindset that is the direct opposite of this Transport for New South Wales policy. On-street parking for private vehicles is still sacrosanct. Private vehicle movement is top priority, and pedestrians are an afterthought. If you don't believe me, take one look at the revamp of 5 Dock. Where are the continuous footpaths that would allow you to walk from one end of the shopping strip to the other without risking being hit by a driver turning in or out of a side street? If council was really serious about making 5 Dock pedestrian friendly and safe, they would have adopted pedestrian first designs. But they didn't. They put some lipstick on the pig in the form of new footpaths and flower beds, but are focused on jamming more and more cars into 5 Dock through additional parking spaces. Their actions speak louder than words. And that's a problem for all of us. It's a nice report, and I'm sure we'll get some wonderful new pram ramps in some places. Shame it won't do anything about crossing the road safely, because that's a traffic problem.